if you want to be a successful piece of software in the world, you have to be somewhat critical. Ideally mission critical, but if you can't, you have to be revenue critical. And in that sense, if your very reason for existence hurts your client's ability to generate ROI, it's not going to work very well.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of PowPod, Proof of Work Podcast, brought to you by NoRamp. Today, I have a great guest, Vivien Garnès, co-founder and co-CEO of Upfluence. Vivien, how are you doing today?
Doing excellent. Thanks for having me, Ben. Happy to be on the show.
Really excited to have you. Love your setup behind you. You've got a perfect setup for a podcast recording.
I came prepared.
Yeah, you certainly did. Upfluence is an awesome platform, really cool story. I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then right after that, please tell the founding story of Upfluence.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, hello everyone, my name is Vivien. I'm based in Lyon in France at the moment. I am very much French because nobody's perfect. And as you said, Ben, I'm one of the co-founders here at Upfluence. What we do at Upfluence, we're an influencer marketing software company. Essentially, we help brands, mostly e-commerce, folks who sell online in general. We help them connect with influencers and leverage these relationships to sell online to by growth, essentially, right? So the founding story, well, it's an old story now because we incorporated in 2013, so it's officially our 10-year anniversary this year. And it was 5 of us at the beginning, so probably we did probably most, if not all, of the many things not to do when you start a company. We started 5 co-founders, which is a lot. We ended up losing one, sadly, a year in. We still have a very good relationship and we're still in close contact, but the entrepreneurial journey was not for him at that point. And we set out to start a business. Our initial vision, which still is very true to these days, was to connect brand with influencers and to help them grow. The ideation process came from a previous business Kevin and I had founded, which was an e-commerce company. And that's a bit of an embarrassing story here, but we were selling neckties online, which is, had we done any sort of market research, we would have realized that no one wears those. I didn't wear one at my own wedding, so I guess that goes to show. But long story short, the only way we managed to sell our ties at the end of the day was to ping bloggers, to send them the product, to basically beg them to write a review, and that review would generate traffic. The traffic would turn into customers and repeat customers and so on and so forth. So we had, the aha moment in a previous business, and we thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a tech platform that does that for you, right? Because the whole process was very long, very time consuming, very opaque as well. And so we thought, right, let's tear things up and let's make something. So that's really the idea around which we started the company.
Everyone's founding story usually happens from an itch that they're scratching or some sort of problem that they face in a day-to-day running some other business. And I guess what I'd be really interested in hearing about is, how did you start scaling it? You had to start from somewhere, and everyone has these really cool growth hacks, how they get these companies to scale quicker and faster. What was the biggest source of growth for you guys, and how did you find it?
Yeah, so fantastic question. And truth be told, Upfluence is a bit atypical as a startup in the sense that we haven't raised much money relative to the size of the business that we currently are. We are well into 8 figures in yearly recurring revenue. We're over 130 employees, and we've raised to date about $5 million, right? So we've been very capital efficient. So I'm saying atypical because the norm sort of is to grow fast, raise big rounds, and play the alphabet game, right? A series A, B, C, D, so on. We haven't done that. So we're in a situation where it was not possible for us to throw money at problems, right? Like a lot of growth hacks sort of require. So at first, and sorry, one more element of context is that that hockey stick growth sort of that you see, our flat part of that growth curve was very long, right? It took us many years to fine-tune the product and to double click on that even more. We first started as a marketplace. A year in, we realized it was not the right model to win in that industry, and we had to pivot. We essentially became an agency for a few years, right? We became a service business, which is very much a swear word in the mouth of many VCs and in the startup world, but that's how we managed to keep the lights on, right? And because service is to a degree lucrative, we're able to keep investing in the business, we're able to keep hiring developers, keep investing in our technology. So much so that at the very end of 2016, early 2017, we're confident enough to repackage that technology into a piece of SaaS product, right? So that's a long introduction, and that's how painful the whole process was. But as soon as we launched late 2016, early 2017, we had a lot of traction straight up, right? And we tried to be very methodical when it came to building our go-to-market engine, essentially, because we had to know how to stretch a dollar, essentially, right? We didn't have all that much capital to squander and to experiment with many things. One thing that we managed to do very well and very efficiently is paid search, paid advertising on Google and such. Not necessarily trusting the first average position in the ad, because that tends to be expensive, especially in the position we're in, where we're fighting against competitor with much bigger fundraisers and a lot more cash to spend. But by being very shifty, very focused on optimizing year in, year out our campaigns, we managed to have a very strong ROI on this. Something else that we've done is we sort of ripped a page in the PLG playbook, in the product-led growth playbook, is that we released a Chrome plugin, which is very much the anti-chamber of our software. It's a free plugin that's free to download and free to use by anyone, basically, and that can give you access to some influencer data that can be very useful. And we marketed this, and very word of mouth, very efficient, lean kind of market. And very quickly, we had 100,000 users on that plugin. That was a very good way to get the name out as well. And years after, to really diversify our marketing mix, we had done, of course, the classics, the content marketing, social media marketing, all that stuff. But one thing that really became big for us a few years after, so I think it took a little bit of maturity for us to make it work, it's outbound sales, right? So we have a team that finds folks that could be relevant, that pitch them what we do, invite them for a demo, and so on and so forth, right? But I guess if I zoom out, the entire thing was to try to figure out what our playbook was going to be, what our go-to-market motion was going to be, and it was inside sales. So, the demo process and the yearly contract, and that's what emerged. Given the maturity of the market, that's what made sense for us. And then we had to figure out, okay, how do we get eyeballs on our website? How do we make sure that these folks want to book a demo with us? How do we close these demos? How do we make them repeat customers? It becomes the goal marketing funnel that you have to take care of, essentially. But as you grow as a business, you really want to diversify the streams of revenue. And so we wanted to graduate from inbound to outbound. And so we created a team that's now a team of 22 or 25 folks who identify who we want to reach out to, what's our ICP, our ideal customer profile, to basically pitch them, bring them some value, try to convey what is it that we do here at Upfluence, invite them for a demo, and so on and so forth.
Amazing. All of these successful companies seem to have found some way to growth hack with something unique. And that is really interesting in your industry, to go ahead and release a free product to kind of get your name out there, have people test out, what you have to offer. And even some of the other platforms that I've used that is atypical, that is unique, which is really great. And as I said, I've used a lot of these platforms before. As you said, a lot of them are very expensive. Some of them are, very robust in terms of product features and offerings. And what that leads me to believe is, if there's a lot of VC dollars in there, if there's a lot of companies trying to build in this space, it must be an effective business and kind of marketing strategy. And so what I would love to hear from you is, why would you say influencer marketing is so effective?
Yeah. So before I answer your question, I'm going to double click on something you just said, which I think was exactly true, is that a lot of the companies in the space are very focused on the higher end of the spectrum. They work very well for the enterprise, right? And most of them, especially the companies who raised a lot of money, tend to go after the Fortune 500 and such, right? And that makes sense, right? This is usually much bigger deals. This is usually much more predictable revenue. There's a higher net revenue retention. There's a lot of things to justify this. But what happens with all the rest of the market, right? And that's really where Upfluence has usually done very well. It's in the sort of middle range of the market, the bigger SMBs, the mid-market, and things like that. But I do believe that the reason why we haven't seen a pure product-led growth motion work in the industry was, up to this point, a matter of maturity, most of it, meaning because influencer marketing is so new, it was still quite rare to know folks who could use a software like this, who knew what they were doing enough to use the software basically autonomously. Until, that was true until very recently, right? Now it's becoming more mainstream every day, and so this is becoming less and less true. That being said, now a company that would try to launch a PLG product right now will be fighting with quote unquote incumbents like Upfluence and all the other folks, and that's a few years late to the party, so it's going to be a lot harder. But at the same time, these big companies who've raised a lot of VC dollars, they can't really disrupt themselves, right? Because if they were to launch a second product that would be PLG, that would create a huge risk of cannibalization. So we're in this interesting space where things can happen, but I'm very much looking forward to see what the industry has to offer on that front. So now I'm closing the parenthesis, apologies for that. To get to your question, why does influencer marketing work? I think this is a fantastic question. And if you zoom all the way out, I think the mechanics are really powerful. The psychology of it is really powerful, right? If Ben, you were to tell me that you're a great guy, I might take your word for it, but it will not be as powerful as this someone else tells me you're a great guy, right? That's the power of recommendation here. If you combine that with the scale of social media, I think there are now 3 social media platforms who have north of 2.5 billion users, active users. That is Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. There's TikTok catching up really fast at 1.5 billion. The scale is really unprecedented, and that really complements the psychological mechanics of recommendation, because social media platforms, the way they build today, it's essentially a dopamine generation machine, right? So it really creates that recurrence and so on and so forth. The last thing I think makes it work so well is, at the end of the day, it's very much a permission-based thing, right? Meaning, if I want to see the updates of one influencer that I like, I have to follow him, right? So it is my permission to give to the influencer for him to provide me with his content, some of which might be sponsored, some of which might be a brand partnership. And that was really refreshing, I think, when it came out compared to all the rest, which is very intrusion-based, right? I am browsing a website, I see a pop-up ad that's disrupting my navigation, my web browsing. If I walk in the street, I see a billboard, it's disrupting my view, and so on and so forth, right? Historically, advertising have been very intrusive as opposed to permission-based. And I think the combination of these 3 things makes influencer marketing really, really powerful.
Word of mouth transcends most barriers or boundaries. It's just one of those things that works so well. You've got human psychology on your side. That's not something that will go away. So yeah, you've got some really good tailwinds behind you. That's for sure.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Yeah. Right place, right time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I was thinking about the social media platforms based on what you were saying. TikTok must have been a massive growth lever for you guys. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we were heading into a direction where the market was very concentrated around Instagram, right? Which on one hand is great, it simplifies a lot of things. On the other hand, that creates a lot of risks as a business owner, right? Because you have sort of all your eggs in one basket. And so we were very attentive at the rise of YouTube, which has been doing very well as a platform in recent years. But TikTok has been really a meteoric rise, right? And for where I stand, it's fantastic, right? Because it really diversifies, it reshuffles the deck, it diversifies who owns what and when. And basically now you're in the market where you have to deal with major trillion-dollar companies or soon-to-be trillion-dollar companies, which is always better than to be at the mercy of one, right? So from a business standpoint, fantastic. From more of the subject matter expertise standpoint, TikTok was really interesting because for a number of reasons, I'm not necessarily going to touch on all of them, but it was a different kind of content as well, right? Vertical filming, short videos, very entertainment focused. So there were also new codes that came with this, right? And so advertisers had to adapt and learn these codes if they wanted to leverage this properly. And the last thing that I'm going to say on that matter is that there's always a little bit of a game of cat and mouse when you're an advertiser, when you want to really make the most of your marketing budget, because The later you are to the party, the more advertisers it's going to be. Offer and low in demand, it's going to be more expensive for you to get eyeballs to whatever is it you have to offer, right? As opposed to what you get to the party, when you get to the party early, you are in a situation that's completely different. You know, you get to set the prices, you get to create the first relationships are going to be very meaningful and very long term with these creators. And so a lot of brands have seen this as a new gold rush, and they were 100% right to, and we definitely surfed that wave as well when it came to our growth.
Making sure you're aware of what's going on in the world that can affect you. And it seems interesting, other than, you know, competitors in your space, the threats don't seem that severe, because the rise of these social media platforms and other growth levers that you can take advantage of, these are all helpful things. You want other companies to succeed in certain spaces, of course, that help you. And I guess this can really go for any company, right? But this is a great example. A rise of a massive social media platform benefits you greatly.
That is correct. And I think our relationship and the creator relationship with the social media platforms is very symbiotic to a degree, right? Because the creators are great at what they do. They're going to create amazing content. This content is going to drive engagement. They're going to drive new user growth. So that's going to increase the ad inventory that this social media platform has to offer, and as such are going to benefit massively from it. So us as a middle guy, basically we make sure that these folks are more successful. We make sure that they make more money from brands. We make sure that they can spend more time doing what they do best, right? And so that puts them in a situation where a lot of them can quit their day job and do this full time, so create more content and so on and so forth. So it's really a virtuous cycle in that sense. But I would not necessarily agree that there are no sort of business risks. We're not at, it's not impossible that one of these social media platforms would decide that that's it, I'm taking my social network private, like Elon Musk did with I was about to say Twitter, but no, X.com, right? And in that case, how do creators get found? You know, they can only be found by the users of the platforms. And you know, that really limits the ability to extract data. That really limits the ability to provide quality analytics. That really limits the ability of third-party apps to interact with the content and so on. So, there's always some risk. I think that's one of the given things with any sort of business. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. But at the end of the day, it's true that we're in a great industry.
Definitely a great industry. And yes, there will always be risks with any business. Those mutually beneficial businesses or that can benefit from all people winning, those are my favorite businesses. Those are the ones that have a much greater chance at success in my mind. You touched on some of the things that helped you scale at Upfluence in terms of just traditional ad marketing. You guys have a very interesting analytics platform side of your platform, which I want to touch on a bit later. But because you are absolutely being aware of the analytics and analysis going on behind the scenes, I was curious if there's one distinct marketing channel that works extremely well, like hand in hand with influencer marketing.
I'm going to give you two, if you allow me.
That's okay.
So a lot of the brands we work with, they've been around the block a few times. They have been in business for a few years. They have this huge base of clients that they do almost nothing with except sending them emails now and then, right? And what we found extremely powerful is to integrate with whatever source of truth, whatever system of record they have for these clients. So for a lot of our clients, it could be their Shopify, their Klaviyo, their WooCommerce, Magento, whatever CMS or marketing automation infrastructure that they use. And by integrating with them, we can cross-reference their database of clients with our database of influencers, right? And what happens is that we can discover their influential customers. And that's an incredibly potent concept because that basically benefits across the entire scope. And let me double click on that. First, it saves a ton of time to the brand, right? Because now instead of having to reach out to net new influencers that may or may never have heard of the brand, right? They now reach from within, right? Folks who already know the brand. So they're going to have much better activation metrics, right? So these folks are more likely to work with you, are more likely to be cheaper, or at least not ask as much money if they were to work with you, because they already love the brand, right? They're already committed, they're already involved. So that's really a strong selling argument. Most of the time, because already clients already use your products. So in some cases, you don't even have to send them net new products, right? They already have them. And because they are so authentic, so genuine, because they love the brand, they've loved this sometime for many years, their content tends to perform better as well, right? So if cynically you look at this through the lens of ROI, it costs you less money, takes you less time, and the outcome is greater, right? So you really maximize the ROI equation by doing that. So influencer marketing plus CRM, absolute fantastic match. The other thing I'm going to say is what platforms called whitelisting. So it's a combination with influencer marketing and traditional paid social media campaigns. So what advertisers do here is that they run a great influencer marketing campaign. They take their top performers, the top 20% of content that's really knocked it out of the park, and they are going to amplify this content to a new lookalike audience, right? So this has worked particularly well for this kind of demographics and so on, right? Let's put a few $100s on each of these posts to really broaden the reach, right? And what we've seen is that you can really give a second breath to this content. Social media content being quite ephemeral in their reach, it tends to fold on quite quickly. That's the way to give it a second shelf life, right? And sometimes to really double, triple, quadruple the success of the campaign you've already had. What has worked for Gymshark or whatever will not necessarily work for you, and vice versa, right? It's for you as a marketer, as a business owner, to really figure out what playbook works for your business, because your unit economics are going to be different, right? Maybe your gross margin rate is bigger or smaller than normal, and as such you can afford to spend more or less, and as such the scale of your campaign that you need to reach is different, and so on and so forth. So really, don't take something that works somewhere else and apply it to your business blindly. Try to really understand what the assumptions are, what the hypothesis is. Try to be very scientific about this, and confront this hypothesis to the reality and make it work as a result.
You talked about figure out what works for your business. And one of the things I was really fascinated by when I was doing research for Upfluence is you are not a two-sided marketplace. This was very interesting to me. Why didn't you decide to build out a two-sided marketplace? They're obviously very difficult. That's the obvious reason, but why else?
So ironically, as I was touching on in one of my first answers, we used to be a marketplace, funnily enough, right? So we started as a two-sided marketplace, and we pivoted a number of times, but we realized it was not what it takes to win in that industry specifically. I still believe it's a very strong model. There's a great many advantages, network effects being one of them that's extremely powerful. But for influencer marketing, it didn't really work. And there's a few reasons behind this. Number one is you need to have a marketplace that's really liquid, right? Because you have to match supply and demand. You cannot be asymmetrical in that sense. And so that creates a situation where you have to grow both supply and demand sides proportionally and very well. That's extremely hard, number one. Number two, the most successful influencer marketing marketplaces out there have a few tens of thousands or maybe 100,000 authenticated influencers out there. What we came to realize is that this is nowhere near enough to really offer and guarantee and promise strong ROIs for your clients. What I mean by that is this. If your marketplace is somewhat agnostic, but you try to service every sort of vertical in the industry, then you are in a situation where it's only going to be a few thousand influencers in the beauty industry, a few thousand in the fashion industry, consumer tech, consumer finance, whatever it is, right? And that's not enough for your clients to be very picky about them, right? And at the end of the day, what impacts most your client's ability to generate ROI is their purchasing, sort of the negotiation power, bargaining power, I meant to say. And if they don't have many tens of thousands of influencers to reach out to, they're not going to reach that bargaining power level, guaranteeing them to buy at the right price influencer content, essentially, and create relationships that matter. And so because of that, and the fact that a lot of marketplaces, sort of part of their business model is taking a commission on a transaction that happens between the demand and the supply, that didn't work for us either. Why? Because as I mentioned, we work with a lot of SMBs, and these SMBs, 70% of our clients do not pay money to influencers. Instead, they will provide a different kind of incentive, a different kind of value proposition. They will send free products, they will invite the influencers to places, to great events, and so on and so forth. They will do co-creation. They will do a number of things that do not necessarily involve a monetary retribution. And so the combination of these three made it clear that having a marketplace in the influencer marketing space was not the way to win. It was not the way to maximize ROI. And the way really I look at this is, if you want to be a successful piece of software in the world, you have to be somewhat critical. Ideally mission critical, but if you can't, you have to be revenue critical. And in that sense, if your very reason for existence hurts your client's ability to generate ROI, it's not going to work very well.
That's destined for failure if you're not revenue critical. That's a really good point. You mentioned 70% do not actually pay you or an influencer. That's really interesting. I want to dive into that. What is the main source of revenue for Upfluence if they're not paying you directly?
So, sorry, they do pay us. They do not necessarily pay the influencers. I wanted to clarify that. We have 3 tiers of revenue as of right now. Give or take 80% is strict SaaS revenue, licenses, yearly contracts. We have about 10%, which is a commission we take on payouts that are being made on the platform. So in that sense, I'm going back to my previous answer, which is a little bit like a marketplace model in that sense. And the third is a little bit of professional services. So for our clients who lack the time or lack the expertise to really make the most out of our platform, we basically bill them by the hour, and we have experts doing things for them, right? So that's our 3 tiers of revenue here.
Got it. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, still very fascinating that most clients aren't paying influencers directly. That just proves how interesting a business you've built.
Yeah, and interesting in industry, right? And I could speak about this for hours, but it all boils down to what's your value proposition. As a brand, what's my value proposition to the influencer, right? And that touches on many, many things. So let me give you a couple of examples. There's one way which would be, Ben, I'm going to give you nothing and you're going to write something about my company. Chances are you're going to say no. If I reach out to 10,000 Bens, some of them might say yes because they have no good affinity with a brand whatsoever. So my individual ROI on them is going to be, infinity virtually, right? Because I paid nothing and I got something in return. It's going to be extremely hard to scale, right? So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, Ben, I'm going to give you $10,000 to write or to produce a piece of content on Instagram for my business. In that case, you're more likely to say yes, right? And so my chances to onboard many, many influencers is going to be much greater. However, my ROI is going to be much lower, right? Because I'm going to really struggle to make up for that upfront investment. And that comes with extra considerations, right? If my incentive is very low, it's going to be hard for me as a brand to have some degree of control over the content, right? If I don't pay you to produce something, you're not going to play the game of sending me prior for approval, then I'm going to send you notes, we're going to do a couple of iterations. That's not going to work for you, right? If you already accepted my terms, you're not going to play that game. The opposite is also true, right? If I pay you $10,000, I expect to have many iterations on the content and to have a high level of control on what's being produced and so on and so forth. And so it's really where you place the cursor here. The one thing that we've seen work very well for brands is to try to leverage the value proposition that basically has a great perceived value and a lower monetary value. Let's say, Ben, I'm Allbirds, I'm sending you a pair of shoes that's worth $100, right? A pair of sneakers. The production costs and the shipping costs are going to be what, $20, $30, $40, right? And the perceived value of the shoe is still going to be $100. Is it as good as $100 in your pocket or in your bank account? Most likely not, but it's still, a product that's worth $100. And so that's how a lot of clients are doing, this kind of positive arbitrage, and they really try to stretch their marketing dollars as a result.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And for these customers to be able to use Upfluence and retain that ROI, as you said, it has to be mission critical or revenue critical. In terms of most people that are interacting with Upfluence, it's probably from a revenue critical standpoint, if I had to guess. In
our industry, what's mission critical is Shopify, right? Because the entire e-commerce website cannot run, it cannot be live, it cannot get new business if it's not live. So they are mission critical. We would be revenue critical. There are a lot of clients who have double digits of their revenue that comes from Upfluence and from influencer marketing at large, right? And so that's really the latter that we've chosen and that we could exploit, truth be told, as opposed to the former.
Absolutely. It's more of like the infrastructure to be able to use a platform like you guys is more mission critical. That does make a lot of sense. And in terms of these companies being able to retain that ROI after interacting with Upfluence, they have to be able to understand the actual numbers. What analysis can they gain from like the deep analysis on the ROI? I would argue it's very important for them to be able to see these numbers ideally in real time. And I'd argue this is a very important part of your platform. I'd love for you to dive into the analytics side, how you decided what to show customers. And yeah, what did you focus on initially?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. To answer this question chronologically, when you start throwing your first product, your first MVP to the market and confront it to the market, you have little resources and you have to pick your battles, right? And so we decided to start at the beginning of a value proposition chain, which is the influencer discovery piece. So we're going to help you, the brand, find influencers that you may want to work with, right? And there's no ROI to this, so it's very hard to prove ROI, right? But we had to add more features until we had a very end-to-end product like we have today. But it only came later in the life of the product to really have this analytics piece in which we could prove ROI. But now, essentially, we sort of prove the value of influencer marketing two different ways. There's number one, the social media performance, and number two, the sales performance. Social media performance is still a bit of vanity metric, very top of the funnel metrics, right? It's what was my reach? Well, how many impressions did I generate? How many likes did I get? How many comments did I get? What's my engagement rate? And things like that, right? Some brands have this sort of internal formula to say, if I've purchased these many eyeballs, then my ROI is X, right? They sort of calculate their earned in media value and how much would have it cost to run this campaign on Google, on Facebook ads, for example. And so they sort of find their ROI on this. But for us, as true marketers, that didn't really work. So what we did is only after we were able to integrate with the CMSs of this world, the Shopify, Magento, BigCommerce and companies like such, WooCommerce as well, we were able to basically pull the sales data as we were bringing it in, right? So now we're able to say this influencer has used this coupon code, he has brought in X number of sales for a total of Y dollars of GMV with an average order value of Z, right? And so we can say that at the campaign level, at the activation level, or at the influencer level. And where it gets really fascinating for me is that it really shifts the way marketers used to work, because back a few years, it was only on the campaign level. Oh, I have Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up. I'm going to make this campaign. And then we have Valentine's Day in February campaign. And then we have this campaign and this and that and that. But now it's becoming more of a, evergreen effort of doing influencer marketing, because they have their community of influencers to whom they send product, to whom they send coupon codes. These influencers bring in sales, and they have this visibility on the ROI at the influencer level, and they're able to say, oh, all right, these 500 are regularly work with. These 10% at the bottom are not really ROI positive. I'm going to stop working with them. I'm going to activate another 10%, right? And so that really is something that gets optimized month in, month out, and that's really becoming basically an everyday thing and not a campaign thing with a few high points through the year. Right?
When you hear from customers about their successes using Upfluence, do they highlight that analytics portion as being the most helpful?
Yeah, 100%. So something we like to say internally, I don't know if you're a fan of cinema and Christopher Nolan movies, but there's the movie The Prestige with Hugh Jackman, in which basically he explains the anatomy of a magic trick, right? And he explains that the prestige is the part in which you really sort of solve the magic trick and you get the applause and you get the celebrity and so on and so forth. And we really, if you look at technology like magic, which is a little bit dubious as a parallel, but bear with me for a second, only the analytics is the prestige of a magic trick, right? Only then can you actually showcase the value of what you do, and only then can you really prove that you're revenue critical to your clients and that if they invest X, they'll get 2X out of it. But once you have a sufficient number of clients doing that and you have sufficient data, not only can you say that pre-sales, saying on average our clients make this, it becomes a super powerful sales argument. And better yet, on the product/data front, what you can do is start having a predictive look at this, right? Saying, we think that this influencer is going to be a very good fit because he's worked very well for others, or influencers who have the same characteristics have worked very well, right? And that's one of the things we're currently working on that we're very excited about, is how predictive can influencer marketing become, right?
Interesting. You actually led me right into my last question. We've talked about the past, we've talked about the present. what's next for influencer marketing? You talked about, you could dive right into what you guys are looking at Upfluence, but also what's next for like influencer marketing as an industry.
Yeah, of course. So I would say three things, not necessarily in order of importance, but one of them is definitely machine learning, artificial intelligence. I think that's going to be a big thing in many different respects. Number one, it can really streamline a lot of things. Influencer marketing tends to be, a long process. So you can look at this to pre-write some emails, to pre-respond to some influencers, to write a brief much more efficiently, to maybe customize your brief at the influencer level, to have something that really speaks to him or her, and so on and so forth. You can have AI as a way to do generative content. We could imagine a world in which the brand provides a data set of all the great content they have about the product. The influencer, his data set is basically his Instagram timeline, right? And a mix of both that creates some great looking content. So that means the level of effort from the influencer really drops, which will impact, a fluidity, the number of collabs and so on and so forth. So very much looking forward to what this could mean. And that's number one. Number two, it's a bit tangent to what I just said, but it's automation at large. I think influencer marketing is still quite time consuming because you have to look for influencers, to contact them, to negotiate with them, to create that relationship, that human component. And some of it cannot be automated. It's not going to be a sort of DSP, SSP programmatic thing quite yet, but a lot of it can be automated in the heavy lifting that can be done. And that's one thing that Upfluence certainly is working on. And last, and maybe it's more conceptual at this point, but it's something that I very strongly believe in, is that I think influencer marketing is becoming quite ubiquitous, meaning it's not being just a marketing thing. I think it's going to become a company-wide thing. And let me give you some examples. Let's assume that you are the gym company Equinox, right? And that next year you're going to hire 10,000 coaches. How about you could look at these CVs, you're going to receive tens of thousands of CVs, try to find their social media platform presence, and try to use that as a factor of hiring these folks. Because at the end of the day, what brings more value to your business, right? That a coach can teach 5% better how to do a proper squat, or that he has tens of thousands of followers himself and can be a really great relay of growth because he will document his job, he will document some of his work with his clients and so on and so forth, right? And so basically, how do you get that potential for word of mouth that we were talking about earlier? How do we really leverage it on an HR perspective, but also maybe from a customer support perspective? Let's say you're a support rep for an e-commerce company and you have 100 tickets to get through with no real prioritization. How do you know that Kim Kardashian is actually, or someone from her team is complaining that she hasn't received XYZ and this is unacceptable? And how do you diffuse that situation before it becomes a PR crisis? Better yet, how do you answer so that it becomes a PR opportunity, right? Saying, oh, I didn't receive that, but in the end of the day, the customer support was so great that I'm giving them a shout out, right? These are two examples. There are hundreds of examples like these that you could find, but I think Upfluence's job in the future will be to be that sort of intermediary layer of data that really connects with all things creator initiatives, right? And really becomes some sort of an OS, an operating system for all things creator economy related.
Influencer marketing becoming a company-wide initiative and you being the data hub underneath it all. That's pretty cool and really destined for success there, if you ask me.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
Of course. Vivien, this has been a lot of fun. Really enjoy it. I think we covered a ton of ground and wish you and Upfluence the best of success.
Thank you very much, Ben. It was a pleasure being here.